All right, folks, Mark here again, cooking books, bringing information. Y'all know how I do with the info. So today I want to talk about Gideon. Gideon is a character in the Bible that really I identify with in some sense, and we'll discuss that. And the topics that I want us to tackle is insecurities, right? And we're going to use Gideon to show us this, and tackle self doubt, self limitations, and just lack of confidence overall. Now let's talk about a quick backdrop. Gideon is he is tasked by God by means of an angel to be a liberator, a leader of Israel. Israel, real quick, Israel is being oppressed by the Midianites at this point. And why? Because they did evil in the sight of God, and that's how it usually goes. They do evil in the sight of God. God allows them to be oppressed by other nations. So in this particular instance, the Midianites are oppressing and keeping Israel in a state of impoverishment. So God comes to Gideon by means of an angel and says, look, you're going to be the leader. You're going to be the king. You're going to be the one to set my people free. You're going to be the one to liberate Israel from their oppressors. Now, that is a Herculean of a task. It is a daunting of a task. It is there is a magnitude in this task, a great magnitude, exceeding magnitude. So Gideon immediately goes into insecure psychology. And how many of us are doing that today? When we have a ambition, we have a goal, we have a dream, but that dream is Herculean. It's magnanimous, right? It's a dream that might just seem too daunting for you to take up, right? It's in your heart, but that's as far as it goes. You don't have the chutzpah, the courage, goal, grit to manifest it. And you do what Gideon does. So what does Gideon do when God gives him this task, this vision, this dream, this goal? He says, look, how am I going to liberate Israel? I am the least in my father's house. So what he is saying, let's break that down and let's extrapolate that a little bit. Let's tease out what's in that statement. Because what that statement is saying in effect is that, look, there's others in my father's house who are better than me. Because he said, I am the least of my father's house, which implies there are others in my father's house. Let's finish his sentence. God, I am the least in my father's house. There are others in my father's house who are taller than me, better looking than me, more adequate, more accomplished, more prestigious, more reputable. There are others in my father's house who are more qualified than me. That's pretty much what that's when we tease it out, that's what that's saying. Let's bring that to today's language, what we would be saying, or today's times. What that would translate to today's time is, look, we are the least in our society. You and I are the least in today's society. We live in the worst neighborhoods, the most dilapidated neighborhoods, the most dilapidated buildings, the most dilapidated hospitals, the most dilapidated schools. We are given the most dilapidated foods. There's redlining, there's gerrymandering, there's gentrification. We have been gentrified. We are ostracized. We are politicized. We are criticized, racialized. We are just not the best. We are not the most suitable to fulfill this plan or this purpose that you have for us. We're not the most suitable. We don't have the most. We're not the most qualified to be commissioned with such a noble task. God, this is what we do. You have this vision. You have this dream. You have this goal. Something burning on the inside, and this is what we do. We're not the most qualified. We don't have we're not the most articulate. We don't know how to articulate ourselves publicly enough. We're not the most critical thinking, the most analytical thinking. We don't have the wits, the grits. We don't have the chutzpah. We're just not, we are the least in our father's society. We are the least in our country's society. We're the least in our society. We're the least. We're not trust fund babies. We're not trust fund kids. We don't have 529 plans, 401ks. We have none of that. So immediately we take on the psychology of Gideon. This is what Gideon does. And so stay with me here. So this is what Gideon does. He takes on the psychology of inferiority complexes. This is what's called inferiority complexes. So how many of us today are still grappling with these inferiority complexes? Be honest with ourselves, right? So you have this vision, you have this dream, burning desire, but yet you don't manifest it. You actually stifle it. You actually put it on the back burner, you bury it, you take it to the grave, whatever. Why? Because of the inferiority complexes, the conditioning that has been placed upon your mind. But not to lose hope, not to be dismayed, because here we have Gideon, right? A mighty warrior who has the same psychology as you at the inception of his task, right? Let's continue. Now, Gideon further goes and says, the angel, encourages Gideon more. And then Gideon goes and says, well, if God is with me, if I am so blessed, why am I so miserable? Why am I so oppressed? Why have all this evil, all this trouble, all these problems, all these bills, all these, issues are tearing me down? But you're telling me God is with me, right? So, excuse me. How many of us are doing that? We all do that till today. This is the Gideon psychology. We all look at ourselves and say, God can't, I'm not blessed, or we don't say it consciously, but in our actions. See, this is the thing, folks. Just because you're not saying something with your mouth doesn't mean you're not saying it with your psyche. Doesn't mean you're not saying it with your subconscious mind. Doesn't mean you're not saying it with your conscious thinking. Doesn't mean you're not saying it with your actions and or deeds. Sometimes your actions and or deeds speak louder than your vocabulary. So sometimes just because you're not verbose, there's no verbosity, so you're not speaking it. Your actions, your deeds, your lack of actions, your lack thereof deeds, your lack of effort is speaking volumes. So, but again, not to be dismayed nor lose hope nor lack, because here's the thing. So Gideon is being tasked to do something that is, again, very magnanimous. And like so many of us today, we begin to doubt ourselves. So, but God gives Gideon 3 signs and confirms and convince and persuades and confirms again his belief system. And ultimately, Gideon takes the mantle. Right? He drops the gauntlet, or pick up the gauntlet, whichever perspective or persuasion you want to look at it from, still the same difference. He accepts the gauntlet, which is to accept the challenge, and ultimately he overcomes by the help of God, and he wins the victory, and he liberates Israel. And 40 years of peace and tranquility is up on the land while Israel is in the land. There's 40 years of peace and tranquility, because God uses Gideon to, by means of several 300 soldiers, I believe, and they ultimately overthrow the kings, the Midianite kings, and liberate Israel from the oppression. So ultimately, the victory is won. So the moral of that, all of that is, in spite of his doubts, in spite of his own self-sabotatory ideologies or thinking, self-sabotatory thinking, self-sabotaging thoughts, and self-limiting, right? Self-limitations on himself, he ultimately overcomes because he gets the grit, the gumption, and the gall from God. And the moral of that is that, folks, you and I today are doing the same thing, right? We have dreams. And when you have those dreams, it is God that give you those dreams. Because in the book of Job, I believe chapter 5, verses, I don't quote me on the verse, but it's in the book of Job where he said, where the scripture is written that when men are asleep, when they are up on their beds, when they slumber, then God opens their ears and seals up their instructions. Let me translate. When you are sleeping, God visits you in dreams and gives you a vision, gives you a purpose. That's when he seals up what your instructions are to fulfill in this world, in this life. So if you have a goal that fell into your heart, it didn't fall into your heart randomly. It fell into your heart because God allowed it to fall into your heart. If there's something that you want to do, some idea, something that, a book you want to write, you've been wanting to write this book and you haven't written it, that's God dropping something into your spirit for you to accomplish, for you to achieve. Don't let the Gideon The Gideon psychology holds you hostage because even Gideon himself overcame himself and fulfilled his purpose. So I like the story of Gideon because there's so much more to it, but I just really want to speak to the insecurities that we grapple with, the self-limitations that we all grapple with, and show you that here Gideon is one of the greats. He is placed into the pantheon of biblical heroes and those who have achieved exceeding biblical exploits because he has done something extraordinary by liberating Israel. So he's in the greats, the Hall of Fame, so to speak. And you and I too can be placed into the hall of our own Hall of Fame of greatness. Should we take up the gauntlet and accept the challenge that God has given us? Till next time, y'all. Mark here, cooking books, bringing information. Peace.